Quite early one morning in the winter in Wales, by the sea that was lying down still and green as grass after a night of tar-black howling and rolling, I went out of the house where I had come to stay for a cold, unseasonable holiday to see if it was raining still, if the outhouse had been blown away, potatoes, shears, rat killer, shrimp nets, and tins of rusty nails aloft on the wind, and if all the cliffs were left. It had been such a ferocious night that someone in a smoky ship-pictured bar had said he could feel his tombstone shaking, even though he was not dead, or at least was moving. But the morning shone as clear and calm as one always imagines tomorrow will shine. The sun lit the sea town, not as a whole, from topmost down-reproving zinc-roofed chapel to empty but for rats and whispers grey warehouse on the harbour, but in separate bright pieces. There, the quay shouldering out, nobody on it now but the gulls and the capstans like small men in tubular trousers. Here, the roof of the police station black as a helmet, dry as a summons, sober as Sunday. There, the splashed church with a cloud in the shape of a bell poised above it, ready to drift and ring. Here, the chimneys of the pink-washed pub, the pub that was waiting for Saturday night as an over-jolly girl waits for sailors. The town was not yet awake. The milkman lay still, lost in the clangor and mists of his Welsh-spoken dreams, the wish-fulfilled tenor voices, more powerful than Caruso's, sweeter than Ben Davis's, thrilling past Cloth Hall and Manchester House up to the frosty hills. The town was not yet awake. Babies in upper bedrooms of salt-white houses dangling over water, or of bow-windowed villas squatting prim in neatly treed but unsteady hill streets, worried the light with their half-in-sleep cries. Miscellaneous retired sea captains emerged from a second from deeper waves than ever tossed their boats, then drowned again, going down, down, into a perhaps Mediterranean blue cabin of sleep, rocked to the sea beat of their ears. Landladies, shawled and bloused and aproned with sleep in the curtained bombazine black of their once spare rooms, remember their loves, their bills, their visitors, dead, decamped, or buried in English deserts until the trumpet of next expensive August roused them again to the world of holiday rain, dismal cliff and sand, seen through the weeping windows of front parlors, tasseled tablecloths, stuffed pheasants, ferns in pots, fading photographs of the bearded and censorious dead, autograph albums with a lock of limp and colorless beribboned hair lolling out between the thick black boards. The town was not yet awake. Birds sang in eaves, bushes, trees, on telegraph wires, rails, fences, spars, and wet masts, not for love or joy, but to keep other birds away. The landlords in feathers disputed the right of even the flying light to descend and perch. The town was not yet awake, and I walked through the streets like a stranger come out of the sea, shrugging off weed and wave and darkness with each step, or like an inquisitive shadow determined to miss nothing. Not the preliminary tremor in the throat of the dawn-saying cock, or the first whirring nudge of arranged time in the belly of the alarm clock on the trinketed chest of drawers under the knitted text and the done-by-hand watercolors of Porthcawl or Trinidad. I walked past the small sea-spying windows, behind whose trim curtains lay mild-mannered men and women not yet awake and, for all I could know, terrible and violent in their dreams. In the head of Miss Hughes, the cozy, clashed the cymbals of an Eastern court. Eunuchs struck gongs the size of Bethesda Chapel. Sultans with voices fiercer than visiting preachers demanded a most un-Welsh dance. Everywhere there glowed and rayed the colors of the small slate-gray woman's dreams, purple, magenta, ruby, sapphire, emerald, vermilion, honey. But I could not believe it. She knitted in her tidy sleep world a beige woolen shroud with "Thou shalt not" on the bosom. I could not imagine Cadwallader Davis, the grocer, in his near-to-waking dream, riding on horseback, two-gunned and cody-bowled through the cactus prairies. He added, he subtracted, he receipted, he filed a prodigious account with a candle dipped in dried egg. What big seas of dreams ran in the captain's sleep? Over what blue-whaled waves did he sail through a rainbow hail of flying fishes to the music of Circe's swinish island? Do not let him be dreaming of dividends and bottled beer and onions. Someone was snoring in one house. I counted 10 savage and indignant grunts and groans like those of a pig in a model and mudless farm, which ended with a window rattler, a wash-basin shaker, a trembler of tooth-glasses, a waker of dormice. It thundered with me to the chapel railings, then brassily vanished. The chapel stood grim and grey, telling the day there was to be no nonsense. The chapel was not asleep. It never cat-napped, nor nodded, nor closed its long, cold eye. I left it telling the morning off, and the seagull hung rebuked above it. And climbing down again and up out of the town, I heard the cocks crow from hidden farmyards, from old roosts above waves, where fabulous seabirds might sit and cry Neptune. And a faraway clock struck from another church in another village in another universe, though the wind blew the time away. And I walked in the timeless morning past a row of white cottages, almost expecting that an ancient man with a great beard and an hourglass and a scythe under his night-dressed arm might lean from the window and ask me the time. I would have told him, "Arise, old counter of the heartbeats of albatrosses, and wake the cavernous sleepers of the town to a dazzling new morning." I would have told him, "You unbelievable father of Eva and Adam, come out, old chicken, and stir up the winter morning with your spoon of a scythe." I would have told him, I would have scampered like a scalded ghost over the cliffs and down to the bilingual sea. Who lived in these cottages? I was a stranger to the sea town, fresh or stale from the city where I worked for my bread and butter, wishing it were lava bread and country salty butter, yolk yellow. Fishermen, certainly. No painters but of boats. No man-dressed women with shooting sticks and sketchbooks and voices like macaws to paint the reluctant heads of critical and sturdy natives who posed by the pint against the chapel dark sea, which would be made more blue than the Bay of Naples, though shallower. I walked on the cliff path again, the town behind and below, waking up now so very slowly. I stopped and turned and looked. Smoke from one chimney. The cobbler's, I thought, but from that distance it may have been the chimney of the retired male nurse who had come to live in Wales after many years' successful wrestling with the mad rich of southern England. He was not liked. He measured you for a straitjacket carefully with his eye. He saw you bounce from rubber walls like a sawbow ball. No behavior surprised him. Many people of the town found it hard to resist leering at him suddenly around the corner, or convulsively dancing, or pointing with laughter and devilish good humor at invisible dog fights, merely to prove to him that they were normal. Smoke from another chimney now. They were burning their last night's dreams. Up from a chimney came a long-haired wraith like an old politician. Someone had been dreaming of the Liberal Party. But no, the smoky figure wove attenuated into a refined and precise grey comma. Someone had been dreaming of reading Charles Morgan. Oh, the town was waking now, and I heard distinctly insistent over the slow-speaking sea the voices of the town blown up to me. And some of the voices said, "I am Miss Mayhews the cozy, a lonely lady waiting in a house by the nasty sea, waiting for a husband and pretty baby to come home at last from wherever they may be. I am Captain Tiny Evans, my ship was the Kidwelly, and Mrs. Tiny Evans has been dead for many a year. Poor Captain Tiny all alone, the neighbors whisper. But I like it all alone, and I hated her. Clara Towie Jenkins, Madam, they call me, an old contralto with a dressing gown on, and I sit at the window and I sing to the sea, for the sea does not notice that my voice has gone. Parchedig Thomas Evans making morning tea. Very weak tea, too. You mustn't waste a leaf. Every morning making tea in my house by the sea. I am troubled by one thing only, and that belief. Open the curtains, light the fire. What are servants for? I am Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard, and I want another snooze. Dust the china, feed the canary, sweep the drawing-room floor, and before you let the sun in, mind he wipes his shoes. I am only Mr. Griffiths, very short-sighted, B.A., Aber. As soon as I finish my egg, I must shuffle off to school. O patron saint of teachers, teach me to keep order and forget those words on the blackboard. Griffith's bat is a fool. Do you hear that whistling? It's me. I am Phoebe, the maid at the king's head, and I'm whistling like a bird. Someone spilt a tin of pepper in the tea. There's 20 for breakfast, and I'm not going to say a word. Thus some of the voices of a cliff-perched town at the far end of Wales moved out of sleep and darkness into the newborn, ancient and ageless morning, moored and were lost. In the middle of the night, I woke from a dream full of whips and lariats as long as serpents, and runaway coaches and mountain passes, and wide, windy gallops over cactus fields. And I heard the old man in the next room crying, "Gee up!" and "Whoa!" and trotting his tongue on the roof of his mouth. It was the first time I had stayed in Grandpa's house. The floorboards had squeaked like mice as I climbed into bed, and the mice between the walls had creaked like wood as though another visitor were walking on them. It was a mild summer night, but curtains had flapped and branches beaten against the window. I'd pulled the sheets over my head and soon was roaring and riding in a book. "Whoa there, my beauties," cried Grandpa. His voice sounded very young and loud, and his tongue had powerful hooves, and he made his bedroom into a great meadow. I thought I would see if he was ill or had set his bedclothes on fire, for my mother had said that he lit his pipe under the blankets and had warned me to run to his help if I smelt smoke in the night. I went on tiptoe through the darkness to his bedroom door, brushing against the furniture and upsetting a candlestick with a thump. When I saw there was a light in the room, I felt frightened, and as I opened the door, I heard Grandpa shout, "Gee up!" as loudly as a bull with a megaphone. He was sitting straight up in bed and rocking from side to side as though the bed were on a rough road and the knotted edges of the counterpane were his reins. His invisible horses stood in a shadow beyond the bedside candle. Over a white flannel nightshirt, he was wearing a red waistcoat with walnut-sized brass buttons. "Is there anything the matter, Grandpa?" I asked, though the clothes were not on fire. His face in the candlelight looked like a ragged quilt pinned upright on the black air and patched all over with goat beards. He stared at me mildly. Then he blew down his pipe, scattering the sparks and making a high, wet dog whistle of the stem, and shouted, "Ask no questions." After a pause, he said slyly, "Do you ever have nightmares, boy?" I said, "No." "Oh, yes, you do," he said. I said I was woken by a voice that was shouting to horses. "What did I tell you?" he said. "You eat too much. Who ever heard of horses in a bedroom?" He fumbled under his pillow, brought out a small, tinkling bag, and carefully untied its strings. He put a sovereign in my hand and said, "Buy a cake." I thanked him and wished him good night. As I closed my bedroom door, I heard his voice crying loudly and gaily, "Gee up!" and the rocking of the traveling bed. In the morning, I woke up from a dream of fiery horses on a plain that was littered with furniture, and of large, cloudy men who rode 6 horses at a time and whipped them with burning bedclothes. Grandpa was at breakfast, dressed in deep black. After breakfast, he said, "There was a terrible loud wind last night," and sat in his armchair by the hearth to make clay balls for the fire. On the last day but one of my visit, I was taken to Llanstefan in a governor's cart pulled by a short, weak pony. Grandpa might have been driving a bison. So tightly he held the reins, so ferociously cracked the long whip, so blasphemously shouted warnings to boys who played in the road, so stoutly stood with his gaitered legs apart and cursed the demon strength and willfulness of his tottering pony. When we came to Llanstefan village at the top of the hill, he left the cart by the Edwinsford Arms and patted the pony's muzzle and gave it sugar, saying, "You're a weak little pony, Jim, to pull big men like us." Grandpa paused at the churchyard and pointed over the iron gate at the angelic headstones and the poor wooden crosses. "There's no sense in lying there," he said. We journeyed back furiously. Jim was a bison again. I woke late on my last morning. Grandpa was not at breakfast. He rose early. I walked in the fields with a new sling and shot at the towy gulls and the rooks in the parsonage trees. The morning passed without a bird falling. I returned for the midday meal through the parson's orchard, but Grandpa was not in the cottage. I went into the garden, but Grandpa was not staring at the fruit trees. I called across to a man who leant on a spade in the field beyond the garden hedge. "Have you seen my grandpa this morning?" He did not stop digging and answered over his shoulder, "I seen him in his fancy waistcoat." Griff, the barber, lived in the next cottage. I called to him through the open door, "Mr. Griff, have you seen my grandpa?" The barber came out in his shirt sleeves. I said, "He's wearing his best waistcoat." I did not know if it was important, but Grandpa wore his waistcoat only in the night. "Has Grandpa been to Llanstefan?" asked Mr. Griff anxiously. "We went there yesterday in a little trap," I said. He hurried indoors, and I heard him talking in Welsh, and he came out again with his white coat on, and he carried a striped and colored walking stick. He strode down the village street, and I ran by his side. When we stopped at the tailor's shop, he cried out, "Dan!" And Dan Taylor stepped from his window where he sat like an Indian priest, but wearing a derby hat. "Di Thomas has got his waistcoat on," said Mr. Griff, "and he's been to Llanstefan." As Dan Taylor searched for his overcoat, Mr. Griff was striding on. "Will Evans," he called outside the carpenter's shop, "Di Thomas has been to Llanstefan, and he's got his waistcoat on." "I'll tell Morgan now," said the carpenter's wife, out of the hammering, sawing darkness of the shop. We called at the butcher's shop and Mr. Price's house, and Mr. Griff repeated his message like a town crier. We gathered together in Johnstown Square. Dan Taylor had his bicycle, Mr. Price his pony trap, and Mr. Griff, the butcher, Morgan Carpenter, and I climbed into the shaking trap, and we trotted off towards Carmarthen town. The tailor led the way, ringing his bell as though there were a fire or a robbery, and an old woman by the gate of a cottage at the end of the street ran inside like a pelted hen. Another woman waved a bright handkerchief. As we clip-clopped over the cobbles that led down to the Towie Bridge, I remembered Grandpa's nightly, noisy journeys that rocked the bed and shook the walls, and I saw his gay waistcoat in a vision and his patchwork head tufted and smiling in the candlelight. The tailor before us turned round in his saddle, his bicycle wobbled and skidded. "I see Di Thomas," he cried. The trap rattled onto the bridge, and I saw Grandpa there. The buttons of his waistcoat shone in the sun. He wore his tight black Sunday trousers and a tall, dusty hat I had seen in a cupboard in the attic, and he carried an ancient bag. He bowed to us. "Good morning, Mr. Price," he said, "and Mr. Griff, and Mr. Morgan, and Mr. Evans." To me, he said, "Good morning, boy." Mr. Griff pointed his colored stick at him. "And what do you think you are doing on Carmarthen Bridge in the middle of the afternoon," he said sternly, "with your best waistcoat and your old hat?" Grandpa did not answer, but inclined his face to the river wind so that his beard was set dancing and wagging as though he talked, and watched the coracle men move like turtles on the shore. Mr. Griff raised his stunted barber's pole. And what do you think you are going, he said, you with your old black bag? Grandpa said, I am going to Llangadog to be buried. And he watched the coracle shells slip into the water lightly, and the gulls complain over the fish-filled water bitterly, as Mr. Price complained, But you aren't dead yet, Di Thomas? For a moment, Grandpa reflected. Then, there's no sense in lying dead in Llanstefan, he said. The ground is comfy in Llangadog. You can twitch your legs without putting them in the sea. His neighbors moved close to him. They said, You aren't dead, Mr. Thomas. How can you be buried then? Nobody's going to bury you in Llanstefan. Come on home, Mr. Thomas. There's strong beer for tea and cake. But Grandpa stood firmly on the bridge and clutched his bag to his side and stared at the flowing river and the sky like a prophet who was in no doubt.